Okay, so here's the setup that I'm using for this test. It's Microsoft Windows 7 Professional. I got a quad-core i7 920, and I've currently got that overclocked to 3666. And then we're using an EVGA X58 Tri-SLI motherboard. I've got 24 gigs of RAM, which I know is a little overkill, but it is what I wanted to do. I've got 4 gigs in each of the 6 slots. And then we're running, currently I'm running 2 GTX 570s in SLI mode, and I've got an SSD with the system. I've got another SSD with some games, and then I've got 3 1TB drives for backing up and other data. So that's the system basically that we are going to be using in testing on, and particularly I'm testing the performance of the GTX 570s in this one. I'm kind of curious how well the stock cards, they're not overclocked or super clocked or anything, they're just basically an EVGA stock card. I'm just curious of how they run in a couple of benchmarks, and I'm curious, like, temperature wise, how well they do. The particular case setup that I'm using over here is a Mountain Mods U2 UFO. I've got currently running 13 fans on that, and 10 of them are intaking some cool fresh air, and then it's all exhausting up here out of the top and then out of the back slots, and also behind, let's see if I can move this out of the way, behind the CPU there is another blowhole there. So this is kind of the setup. I've got the cards spaced apart. I could not run Tri-SLI like this, obviously, being spaced apart, and then put the sound card in the center. My cable management isn't that great at the moment, but I'm just doing a test of these cards before I swap them out. And then, so that's kind of the idea I've got going on with the case. You can see some fans there. There's some fans in the back. The 3 fans in front blowing across the top, and then there's 2 fans down there. So that'll be pulling in quite a bit of air. I've got them all set up on the high mode. I do have it to where I can turn them down or off if I wish to make it quieter. But obviously when I'm doing any kind of benchmarking or gaming, I don't mind the noise, so I definitely prefer the cooling, and I will have those turned up throughout the test, so they'll probably be audible. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so we'll be using the 3D Mark 11 software to do some benchmarking, and I'm going to be monitoring the temperatures with the CPU ID hardware monitor, so we can get an idea of what temperatures everything hits during the rigorous testing. Unfortunately, I only have the basic edition of 3D Mark 11. I did not purchase it, so I can only use the performance setting, but that should be fine. And then, alright, so let's get started with this and see where we come out. Alright, so here is the most intensive test, the final test in 3D Mark 11, or rather at least the version that I'm using. I'm curious how well it handles all of it together, especially the PhysX part of it. I set the driver to auto determine which to use, which card, or whether to use the CPU. So we'll see how well this does. Frames are still climbing. We're in the 20s, 24, 25, it's kind of slowing down, 26. Let's see where we end up at. I'll bring up the temperatures while we wait for my slow internet service. Alright, so our CPU got to 55 and the video cards got to 57 for the first one and 55 for the second one. No doubt if those cards were spaced on top of each other, I would think that first one we would see quite a bit higher, being that it would be breathing directly off of the other card's PCB and it would have some airflow issues. But I feel pretty good about those temperatures. That's actually quite better than I thought they were going to be. Okay, so now click. Alright, so we have a 3D Mark 11 score of P9782, and it says my score is comparable to similar systems, so my PC appears to be functioning normally, which is quite good. And then going down the list here, everything looks like it worked correctly. SLI on, 4 cores, 3.665 megahertz, 24 gigs of RAM. Everything looked like it reported correctly there. So we end up with a graphics score of 10,852, a physics score is 8,001, combined score of 6962. So you can kind of see a little bit there where our graphics tests were. Alright, so that will conclude the 3D Mark 11 on a pair of GTX 570s in SLI. Okay, now we are going to run the Heaven benchmark, and then here you can see we're going to use DirectX 11, no 3D, high shaders, normal tessellation, and so this is basically the default settings. We are going to run at 1920 by 1080. This benchmark will let me do that, and this is basically the default settings that came up when I started the program. So let's click run here. Here we are running the Heaven benchmark. We're not quite at the middle of it yet, and I'm actually really happy with the way the 570s are running together. It seems to be doing quite a bit better than I anticipated, so that's nice. We're seeing some frames in the 70s, high 70s, low 80s, so I'm kind of pretty happy with that. Very pretty benchmark utility here. Very, very nice graphics. So the Heaven benchmark has ended, and we can see our scores from here. We've got an 85.4 average and the score of 2152. Minimum 42.9, maximum 195.7. We can see our hardware there and settings. And I'm actually thinking that those GTX 570s did a hell of a job here. That's pretty good. Better, much better than I expected. I was expecting a bit lower of a score, so yeah, that's good. Alright, so that ends the Heaven benchmarking for the GTX 570 SLI combo. Alright, so our Heaven benchmark has ended. Now we can take a look at the temperatures. We see the CPU saw 57 at its highest point, and the graphics card saw 57 and 55 respectively at their highest points, which actually I'm pretty happy with, considering, you know, running that stressful test on them. No doubt it has something to do with the high airflow that I'm pushing through the case. It gets a little noisy for some people, but it doesn't bother me any. I'd much rather have a cool case than a warmer, silent one. I think it definitely helps extend the life of the hardware. And when I'm gaming, if I just turn up the volume on the speakers a bit, I really don't even hear that the fan's running, so it doesn't bother me at all one bit. Alright, so I guess the GTX 570s impressed me. They did very well in SLI. I'm pretty happy with them. So that will conclude my testing of the GTX 570 SLI combo.